She made beds in a New York boarding house and awakened the forbidden love of the city's most desired millionaire. In the frozen winter of 1898, beneath the dim glow of gaslight, a maid who had been taught to remain unseen crosses paths with a man hiding from his own name. A single glance ignites a storm of passion, but also a dangerous secret. What begins in silence soon threatens to unravel the boundaries of class, pride, and destiny. Will their hearts defy the world that seeks to keep them apart, or will duty and fear silence love before it can bloom? Share with me where you're listening from, and tell me, do you believe true love can ever conquer society's chains? New York City, winter of 1898. The wind carried with it the sharp scent of coal smoke and snowmelt, curling through the narrow streets of Broome Street like a whispered warning. The city roared just beyond the boarding house's thin brick walls. Trolleys screeched, vendors shouted in Yiddish and Italian, and horses clattered over slush-stained cobblestones. But inside the old brownstone at number 96, the world moved slower, quieter. It belonged to the women who scrubbed, stitched, and served, women like Anna Brooks. At 26, Anna had become nearly invisible to the world around her, an expert at silence, at slipping between corridors and conversations without leaving a trace. Her mornings began before dawn, with raw hands plunged into icy water, scrubbing linens until her knuckles stung. Her dark chestnut hair was always pinned in a tight, obedient bun, covered with a faded kerchief. Her uniform, a simple grey dress, high-necked and buttoned to the throat, smelled faintly of starch and lye. The only softness she allowed herself was a frayed blue ribbon, sewn discreetly into the inner hem of her apron, the last remnant of a sister who died before the age of 12. That morning, as frost painted delicate webs on the inside of the window panes, Anna carried a pitcher of hot water up the narrow stairs, careful not to let it slosh. A new guest had arrived late the night before. Mrs. Keene, the boarding house's owner, had spoken little of him, only that he would stay for an indefinite period and required no service beyond fresh linens and boiling water. "Room 7, she had said, her thin mouth tightening as she handed Anna the key. "And don't linger." Room 7 had once belonged to a widower who drank himself to death the previous spring. It faced the street, with a view of rooftops and factory smoke, and the bed creaked no matter how gently it was turned. Anna unlocked the door and entered with her usual care. The man was there. He stood by the window, his back to her, one hand resting lightly on the frost-rimmed sill. The morning light, cold and indifferent, spilled through the curtainless glass and fell across his shoulders. His coat, a fine wool garment that had clearly seen better tailoring than this neighborhood demanded, hung from a peg beside the door. He wore a white shirt with a faint blue stripe, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his hair, a deep blonde just brushing gold, was neatly combed. Anna froze. She had expected an empty room, a bed to make, and silence. Instead he turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, only a breath perhaps, everything else ceased. The room, the cold, the dull throb in her wrists from wringing towels, all of it vanished beneath the weight of his gaze. His eyes were a shade of blue she had never seen before, not pale like winter, nor storm dark, but somewhere in between, thoughtful, worn, as if they had seen too much beauty and too much ruin to belong to someone so young. He didn't speak, nor did she. Anna lowered her gaze first, stepping back toward the basin. "I beg your pardon," she murmured. "I thought I was told—" "I arrived late," he said, his voice smooth, warm, but quiet. "You must be Miss Brooks." The fact that he knew her name startled her more than his presence. She had never spoken it aloud to a guest before. "I am," she said softly, setting the pitcher down on the dresser. "I've brought hot water. Shall I change your linens as well, sir?" "No," he said, though there was no cruelty in his tone. "That won't be necessary." He stepped aside to give her space, but Anna could feel his presence behind her like a current. Every movement, folding the towel, adjusting the pitcher, felt suddenly exposed, as if her hands had never belonged to her until now. She was used to men looking through her, past her, never at her. He was different. "You read," he said quietly. She turned her head just slightly. "Sir." He nodded toward the small book, tucked between the folds of her apron. Anna's cheeks warmed. She had not meant for it to show. "Only in the evenings," she replied. "After my duties." "Well, what is it you're reading?" "Jane Eyre," she answered before thinking. Her heart quickened, but only borrowed. "It belongs to Mrs. Keene's daughter." He smiled then, and it startled her. It wasn't the practiced, arrogant smile of the men who passed through this house with their loud laughter and cheap cologne. It was something softer, sincere. "A fine story," he said. "Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You strike me as someone who would admire a woman of spirit." Anna said nothing. She didn't know how. He extended his hand. "I'm Ellis, Thomas Ellis." She stared at his hand, then offered hers. Not as a lady would, she had never been taught such things, but as a worker, tentative and unsure. His fingers closed around hers gently, and a shiver bloomed at the base of her neck. "Miss Brooks," she whispered. He released her hand slowly, as though reluctant to let go. She gathered the soiled towel and turned to the door, but something had shifted in the air. It wasn't love. Not yet. It wasn't even attraction in the way she understood it. It was the tremor before the storm, the moment a candle flickers before it flares. He watched her leave, and Anna, for the first time in many long grey months, dared to look back. The soot-streaked windows of Broome Street glimmered faintly under a hesitant sun, but inside room 7 the air remained still, thick with the weight of silence and something else. Something Nicholas Van Allen had never known in all his 32 years. Stillness without expectation. His coat, tailored on Fifth Avenue, hung beside a wall cracked by time. His boots, polished to a military shine, rested beside a modest iron bed frame. There was no valet to press his collar, no butler to announce his arrival, no footman to fetch the morning edition. Here, in the modest boarding house with paper-thin walls and no servants to speak his name with reverence, he had vanished. Willingly, desperately, and without a trace. For the first time since his youth, he had become no one. He sat by the window, the city's breath rising in little puffs from chimneys beyond the glass, and watched the horses move through slush with the determination of beasts that knew no rest. It was a rhythm he found oddly soothing, predictable, honest. Unlike the ballrooms and parlours of his former world, where words were chosen not for truth, but for effect, and even affection came wrapped in calculation. He had abandoned it all. The opulent Van Allen mansion, the censure of his father, the headlines still fresh with scandal. Van Allen heir spurns political union, wedding off with senator's daughter, the herald had screamed. He had burned the clipping, but the ashes still clung to his mind. Now he was Mr. Ellis, a man of no heritage, no burden, no expectation. He had told no one where he had gone. Only Thomas Blythe, his former schoolmate turned journalist, whose silence could still be bought, not with coin, but with loyalty forged in the fire of long-shared secrets. Nicholas leaned back in the creaking chair and exhaled slowly. And then he saw her. Anna Brooks passed in the hallway beyond his door, her silhouette fleeting, barely more than a whisper of grey fabric and quiet steps. But his breath caught, not because of her beauty, which was not the kind that shouted, but the kind that lingered. She walked like someone who had learned not to disturb the world, and in doing so became the only part of it worth noticing. He had spoken her name once, just to see how it felt in his mouth. Anna. It sounded like an apology and a promise all at once. She had barely looked at him since their first meeting, always lowering her gaze, her voice careful, controlled. And yet, when she turned her head to the side, when a strand of hair slipped from her scarf and brushed the curve of her cheek, something within him stirred with a quiet urgency he did not yet understand. That afternoon, He ventured downstairs. The common parlour smelled faintly of tea and coal smoke. A cracked mirror hung above the mantel, and the faded rug bore the weight of many feet and few fortunes. He found her there, wiping the dust from the windowsill, her back to him. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone warm but low so as not to startle her. She turned slowly, her grey eyes lifting just enough to meet his. A slight nod. No smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ellis." "May I?" He gestured toward the nearby chair. She hesitated. It was not proper, not expected, but something in her eyes flickered. Not agreement, but curiosity. She returned to her cleaning, slower now. "You've been in New York long?" he asked. "Since I was 15. "And before?" She paused. "I was born near Albany. My father worked the rails. My mother took in sewing." He nodded, absorbing every word as if it were a secret entrusted to him. "I've always found something comforting in railroads," he said. "They follow one path, straightforward, purposeful." Anna didn't answer, but she didn't leave. "And you?" she asked at last, softly. "Have you always been in the city?" His throat tightened. "In a manner of speaking," he replied, "but I've never belonged to it. Until now." She glanced at him then, not long, but long enough for him to feel it. That subtle flicker in her gaze that suggested she had known what it meant to live among places where one did not belong. Mrs. Keene entered then, her sharp eyes narrowing at the sight of them. "Miss Brooks," she said crisply, "your hands are needed in the kitchen." Anna turned immediately, her gaze lowered. "Yes, ma'am." She left without another word. Nicholas watched her go, feeling a small emptiness replace her presence in the room. Mrs. Keene turned to him, her voice softened with the syrup of pretense. "You'll forgive Miss Brooks," she said. "She's a quiet one, hard worker, but sometimes—" She sniffed. "The help forgets their place." Nicholas met her eyes, calm and unyielding. "She seems perfectly in place to me." The landlady pursed her lips but said nothing more. That evening, as shadows climbed the walls of room 7, Nicholas stood again at the window, candlelight flickering behind him. He thought of Anna's hands, raw from cold water and bleach, and her voice, low, steady, unbeautified. He thought of her silence and how it somehow said more than the practiced speeches of debutantes he had danced with under chandeliers. He did not yet love her. But something had shifted inside him. A quiet awareness that the life he had left behind had never truly been his, and that the woman who moved through corridors without leaving footprints had somehow awakened the part of him he had buried beneath silks, scandals, and family expectations. In the dim light he picked up the book he had carried with him, The Tempest, bound in worn leather, and turned a page without reading it. He had no future to offer, no past he wished to share. But in that fragile space in between, perhaps, just perhaps, there was a place where two invisible souls could be seen. Downstairs, in the cramped corner near the servants' table, Anna rinsed the last of the dishes beneath a slow drip of steaming water. The room was empty. Her hands ached, her shoulders heavy, but her mind would not rest. She had not meant to speak to him. Not truly. And yet, she touched her cheek without realizing it. The skin was still warm. "Mrs." Keene's words returned like a warning in the steam. "You were born to serve, not to be seen." But hadn't he seen her? Really seen her? She didn't know what it meant yet, didn't dare name it. But something had awakened inside her that day. Something dangerous, something beautiful, and she wasn't sure she wanted it to go back to sleep. The wind off the Hudson carried a chill sharper than any blade, and yet Anna Brooks walked through the narrow lane behind Broome Street as though untouched by it. Her gloved hands clutched a small paper parcel tied with twine. The corners softened from where her fingers had pressed too tightly. Inside, wrapped in brown linen, was a book. Not just any book. A slim, leather-bound volume of poetry, Leaves of Grass, by Walt Whitman. She had admired it once in the shop window near Spring Street, her gaze lingering for only a moment too long, and now it was hers. Given to her not by family, not by friend, but by Mr. Ellis, the mysterious boarder, whose presence continued to turn her world ever so slightly askew. She had found it upon her pillow that morning. No note, no signature, just the book, carefully wrapped, placed with intention and gentleness. Her first instinct had been to return it. It was inappropriate, dangerous, but she had not. She could not. Instead, she pressed it to her chest and hid it beneath the folds of her uniform as if it were a relic, sacred and forbidden. Inside the boarding house, the air was heavy with the scent of boiled potatoes and ash. The tenants had gathered for supper, their chatter muted by the storm brewing beyond the windows. Jude Malley, a young carpenter who had long considered Anna his to claim, watched her from across the room. His gaze was different now, not admiring but questioning, sharp-edged. He had noticed her distraction, the quiet smile that lingered on her lips as she passed through the kitchen. "Something's changed with her," he muttered to Mrs. Keene, whose ears were always tuned to unrest. "That boarder, Ellis, he's been too kind." Mrs. Keene pursed her lips. She too had noticed. A passing glance in the hallway. A polite greeting stretched just a second too long, and now whispers were beginning to stir, like dry leaves skittering across the floor before a storm. Upstairs, Nicholas stood before the cracked mirror in his room, adjusting the collar of his coat. He had been foolish to leave the book without a word, but words had failed him. How could he explain what stirred within him each time Anna passed, the way silence wrapped around her like a garment, dignified and unreachable? He picked up his gloves and hat, preparing to take his usual walk. The city had become his hiding place, but it no longer felt like exile. It was beginning to feel like possibility. Still, he knew the illusion could not last, especially now. That morning, while browsing a market near Washington Square, he had spotted a man watching him, a man from his world. Charles Loring, an associate of his father's, dressed in the usual black wool coat and top hat, with a monocle that glinted like accusation. Their eyes had met for only a second, but it was enough. Loring had tilted his head, puzzled as though trying to place a face seen once at a gala or on the steps of the Union Club. Nicholas had turned away quickly, heart pounding, but the encounter had left him shaken. He could no longer assume anonymity. Time was no longer on his side. He stepped out into the street, the cold biting at his cheeks, and made his way toward the bookstore near Spring Street. He needed distraction, something ordinary, grounding. But as he turned the corner, he saw her, Anna. She stood just beyond the shop window, staring at the display, though her reflection in the glass betrayed her distraction. She wasn't truly looking at the books. She was thinking, and in her hands she still held the parcel. Nicholas approached quietly. "I wasn't sure you would accept it," he said gently. She turned, startled. Her expression shifted between surprise and something more elusive, gratitude laced with worry. "I haven't accepted it," she replied. "I only didn't want to leave it behind," he nodded. "Would you rather I took it back?" She hesitated. The wind tugged at the edge of her scarf, brushing a lock of chestnut hair across her cheek. Her gloved fingers tightened around the book. "No," she said at last, barely above a whisper. "I thought it might speak to you," he said. "The words, they speak to me." Her gaze lifted, meeting his fully now. "Why would a man like you think about what speaks to a woman like me?" That question. That wound carved into every syllable. Nicholas inhaled slowly. "Perhaps because you listen more deeply than anyone I've ever met." For a moment, the city disappeared. There was no traffic, no vendors, no distant clang of trolleys. Only the two of them, bound by something neither dared to name. And then, the moment shattered. "Anna!" Jude's voice rang sharp behind them. She stepped back instantly, as though burned. Jude strode toward them, his boots striking the cobblestones with purpose. His gaze cut from Anna to Nicholas, heavy with accusation. "I've been looking for you," he said to her, not sparing a greeting for the man beside her. "Mrs. Keene says you're needed." Anna opened her mouth to speak, but Jude's tone sharpened. "You've been out walking too long. People are starting to talk." Nicholas stepped forward slightly, but not aggressively. His presence alone was enough to reframe the dynamic. "I believe Miss Brooks is entitled to a few moments of fresh air," he said calmly. Jude bristled. "And who are you to say what she's entitled to?" Anna's heart raced. She wanted to speak, to ease the tension, but the words remained trapped in her throat. "She's not some lady to be courted on the street," Jude added. "She works, like the rest of us." Nicholas's voice was cool but steady. "And yet, she deserves respect, like the rest of us." Anna turned to Jude, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Please," she said softly, "I'll return now." She turned without another word, walking back toward the boarding house with the book held tightly against her chest. Nicholas remained still. Jude stared at him a moment longer, then spat on the ground before following after her. Back in her room that evening, Anna sat on the edge of her cot, the lamp casting soft shadows on the plastered wall. She opened the book slowly, tracing the delicate lettering with the tips of her fingers. The poetry spoke of longing, of the unseen, of the quiet music within the soul. She was torn. What was this strange feeling inside her? It was not love, not yet, but it was dangerous. It was unwise. It made her feel alive. And then, beneath the last page, something caught her eye. A slip of parchment tucked carefully inside. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. It read, in neat masculine script, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." There was no name, no signature, but the meaning was clear. She closed the book, pressing it to her chest, as though to still the storm rising inside her. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. But within room 7, within the narrow halls of a modest boarding house on Broome Street, the shadows were beginning to dance, and nothing would ever be the same again. The snow fell in whispers that morning, blanketing Broome Street in a hush that softened the world's harshness. Outside the boarding house, the city stirred beneath a delicate veil of white, its familiar clamour muted by winter's breath. Carriages moved cautiously along the icy streets, and plumes of chimney smoke rose like sighs into the silver sky. But inside room 7, the silence was heavier still. Nicholas sat on the edge of his bed, a letter clutched tightly in his gloved hand. The seal had been broken. The words, written in his mother's unmistakable script, were sharp and perfumed with duty. "You are expected at the Winter Garden Ball. The family cannot afford further scandal. Appear, smile, be who you were raised to be." The Van Allens never made requests. They issued commands cloaked in etiquette. He had delayed this summons for as long as he could, but the time had come to step once more into the world he had tried to forget. He stood slowly, crossing the room with measured restraint, and gazed out the frosted window toward the city's edge. Far beyond the brick chimneys and lowly rooftops was Fifth Avenue, the golden corridor of chandeliers and crystal glasses, of whispered gossip and curated smiles. And somewhere beneath that same sky, she moved through her morning as she always did, quiet, diligent, invisible to all but him. Anna. The name no longer felt foreign in his mouth. It felt sacred. He had to see her once more before returning to the world that had forged him in silver and expectation. That evening, as gaslights flickered along the paths of Central Park, he waited beneath the iron arch of Wagner's Cove, snow collecting on the shoulders of his dark coat. His breath came in small clouds, and the river beside him whispered beneath a thin crust of ice. He heard her before he saw her, the soft tread of boots against snow, the quickening rhythm of her breath. And then, from the shadows, she appeared. Anna wore a plain navy cloak, the hem damp with snow, and a woolen scarf drawn tight beneath her chin. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her eyes, wide and searching, held a light that no frost could dim. She stopped a few paces away, uncertain. "You said it was urgent," she whispered. "It is," Nicholas replied gently. He stepped closer, removing his hat. His blonde hair, slightly tousled from wind and worry, framed a face drawn with quiet sorrow. "I must leave." he said. Tonight. She blinked once but made no sound. They've summoned me to Fifth Avenue, he continued. My family is hosting their winter garden ball. Anna lowered her gaze. I see. He reached for her hand, encasing her chilled fingers in his own. No, you don't see. You can't. I understand more than you think, she said, her voice strained. You belong there, among them. This was never meant to be more than what it was. What it was, he echoed, his voice hoarse. She pulled her hand away, but not with anger, with fear of believing in things she had no right to hope for. Nicholas took a step closer. I'm not the man I was raised to be, he said, not anymore. Not since you. Anna shook her head. Please don't say things you'll regret. I'll regret nothing, he said softly, except not telling you the truth. The wind picked up, stirring the snow into tiny cyclones around their feet. My name isn't Thomas Ellis, he said. It never was. I'm Nicholas Van Allen, son of Lawrence Van Allen, of the shipping dynasty, of Fifth Avenue. She froze. The world narrowed around her. I lied, he said. Not to mock you, not to play a game. I lied to escape the life they expect me to lead, to find something real, and I found you. Anna's breath caught. You shouldn't have told me, she whispered. You should have let me go on believing. Why? Because now I don't know what to do with this, she said, placing a trembling hand over her chest. Nicholas stepped forward. His gloved fingers touched her cheek, brushing away a snowflake. I don't ask you for promises, he said. Only a moment, one moment, to remember. Before she could respond, he leaned forward, his lips brushing hers, tentative, reverent. The kiss was not one of possession or demand, but of reverence. It was a confession made in silence, a vow wrapped in snow and breath and trembling. When he pulled away, Anna's eyes were closed. I will return, he whispered. She nodded, but said nothing. He stepped back, putting his hat on again. As he walked away, she stood frozen beneath the gaslight, the snow falling like lace upon her hair. She didn't move for a long time, not even when the snow turned to sleet. Back at the boarding house, the air was no warmer. Mrs. Keene sat in the parlour sorting receipts, her lips pursed in habitual suspicion. When Anna returned, late and red-cheeked, the landlady looked up with narrowed eyes. You've been gone long. Anna removed her cloak in silence. Mrs. Keene stood. I've been told, she said coldly, that you were seen walking with Mr. Ellis. Anna paused. We spoke. He's no tenant, Anna, she hissed. He's a man, a rich one, no doubt. Or worse, a liar. And you're my responsibility while under my roof. I've done nothing wrong. Mrs. Keene's voice rose. You've drawn attention, and that is wrong enough. I won't have you giving the other girls ideas. Anna turned to face her, her chin raised. I haven't given anyone anything. You've given him your time, the woman snapped. And time leads to expectations. If I catch you with him again, you'll pack your things. I won't have scandal in my house. Anna stood silent. Mrs. Keene leaned close, her voice a warning. Women like you are meant to serve, not to be seen. That night, as Anna lay beneath the thin blankets of her cot, the kiss still lingered on her lips, and the warning echoed louder than her heartbeat. Across the city, Fifth Avenue blazed with gaslight and gold. The Winter Garden Ball had begun. The Van Allen mansion shimmered with the extravagance only the old elite could command. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows upon marble, and the scent of lilacs mingled with the perfume of women in gowns worth more than most families would earn in a year. Nicholas stood at the top of the grand staircase, dressed in a tailcoat of midnight blue, a starched white shirt, and a waistcoat embroidered with golden threads. Around him, society murmured and smiled, but all he could see was the memory of a navy cloak and a pair of grey eyes filled with sorrow. He descended slowly, each step heavier than the last. At the bottom, Clara Willoughby awaited him, the senator's daughter, the woman his family had once intended for him. Her gloved hand extended in practiced grace. Nicholas, she purred. "So glad you've come back to us." He took her hand, not out of affection, but out of duty. As the waltz began and the couples circled beneath the painted ceiling, Nicholas danced as he had been taught, but his heart was still in the snow. The days bled one into another, a grey procession of silence and duty. The snow began to melt, leaving behind dirty slush that clung to the edges of the city like regret. Broome Street had lost its crisp winter charm, and with it, Anna Brooks lost the last threads of a fragile hope she had once dared to hold. Nicholas had not returned, not after the winter garden ball, not after his whispered promise beneath the falling snow in Central Park, not even a word, a message, a trace. She tried not to dwell on it, on the warmth of his hand, on the softness in his voice when he spoke her name. She told herself it had been a dream, a foolish detour, a moment of kindness mistaken for something more. She reminded herself who she was and who he was. The space between them was not merely distance, it was a chasm carved by birth, by blood, by coin and expectation. And so she did what women like her had always done. She worked. She scrubbed the banisters, polished the gas lamps, boiled the laundry until her hands turned red and raw. She moved like a ghost through the boarding house, silent and unseen, not because she wished to be, but because she knew now the danger of being seen. Mrs. Keene watched her closely. Jude lingered in the hallway too often. The other girls whispered when she passed, but Anna said nothing. The book of poetry he had given her remained hidden beneath the floorboard of her room, untouched. She had tried once to read a page, but the words blurred into wounds, and she could not bear it. One grey morning, as the clock struck 9, Mrs. Keene called her into the parlour. "I received an inquiry," the landlady said, without looking up from her ledger. "There's a place opening at a corset factory uptown. Decent wage. You're being recommended." Anna's breath caught. "I didn't ask for placement." Mrs. Keene's eyes lifted slowly. "You've become a source of unrest in this house. I won't have men knocking at my door looking for trouble. You'll go at week's end." There was no room for protest. That night, Anna sat at the edge of her cot, staring at the small bundle of her belongings. Her world could be packed in one cloth sack: 2 dresses, a pair of worn shoes, her scarf, and a comb missing 3 teeth. She stared at her hands, the knuckles calloused, the nails short and cracked, and wondered how she had ever believed a man like Nicholas Van Allen could have truly seen her. Love was not for women like her. It was a season, and hers had passed. On her final morning at the boarding house, the snow returned, light, hesitant like an apology. She dressed slowly, tying the laces of her boots with trembling fingers. As she folded the last of her clothes, a sudden knock at the door startled her. It was one of the younger maids, her eyes wide, her hands clutching something to her chest. "This was found behind the bureau in Mrs. Keene's office," the girl whispered. "It had your name on it. She must have forgotten it. Or not." Anna reached out slowly. It was a letter, torn, damp in the corners, the envelope smudged with rain and soot, but unmistakably addressed to her. Her heart began to pound. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. The ink had run in places, but the handwriting was familiar, strong, elegant, with a certain restraint that made it all the more personal. "Anna, I fear by the time this reaches you, I will already have disappointed you. Know this, I did not choose silence. I was not allowed to speak. After the ball, my every movement was watched, my words monitored. I was forced to remain, to attend functions, to make appearances, all under the threat of public ruin and familial disgrace. I have no excuses, only regret. Please wait for me. I will come to you. I will make this right. Nicholas." Anna read the words once, then again, her eyes filling with tears that refused to fall. He had written. He had wanted her. But it was too late. Her bag was packed. Her place was lost. Her name already forgotten within those walls. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the lining of her coat. Outside, the snow had thickened. She stepped out into it like one walking into the unknown, her chin lifted, her eyes dry. She did not look back. The factory was nothing like the boarding house. It was louder, darker, and colder. The machines hissed and clicked like metal serpents, and the women who worked there rarely spoke above a whisper. Anna was placed at a station with a needle press, her task monotonous and brutal. The supervisors were harsh, and the air was heavy with the scent of steam, starch, and despair. But it was work, it was purpose, and it kept her from thinking. At night, in the boarding dormitory where she now shared a room with 3 other women, she clutched the letter beneath her pillow like a secret too precious to speak aloud. She reread it in darkness. Each word became both balm and blade. "Please wait for me. I will come to you." But he hadn't. Not yet. And she could not live on, not yet. The days passed, each one duller than the last. She grew quieter, harder. Her hands bled beneath the pressure of the machines, but she did not complain. Her name was no longer Anna Brooks, the girl who had been kissed beneath the gaslight. She was no one again, a worker, a shadow, and she told herself again and again that it was better this way, that what they'd shared had only ever been a moment, that love across class was a fairy tale meant to distract women like her from the truth. She repeated these lies until they sounded like prayers, until she almost believed them. Almost. The name Nicholas Van Allen danced across headlines in bold, merciless ink. From the New York Herald to the Evening Post, society gasped in unison as the scandal spilled from the drawing rooms of the elite to the soot-streaked hands of newsboys on every corner. Van Allen heir vanishes before marriage, Fifth Avenue shaken by defiance. Rumors of a secret affair. Who is the woman? Speculation became fuel for the glittering bonfire of Manhattan's high society. Had he fled the country? Was he ruined in secret debt? Had he, God forbid, fallen in love with someone beneath his station? The last theory was whispered with the most delicious venom, for in the Gilded Age, love was only a virtue if it obeyed rank. But the truth was more fragile than gossip and more desperate than society would ever imagine. Nicholas had disappeared, but not into exile. He had vanished into the underbelly of the city, chasing the only thing that had ever made him feel alive. He was searching for Anna. No longer dressed in fine wool coats and polished leather boots, he walked in borrowed garments, his hair longer now, his jaw shadowed with the faint stubble of sleepless nights. He searched tenements and factories, kitchens and sewing rooms, asking for her with caution, showing her name written carefully on scraps of paper, as though she were a ghost he begged the city to reveal. But Anna Brooks was gone. In her place was a woman named Margaret Burke, a name she had chosen from a forgotten birth record posted at a parish door. She had taken it like armor, like a lock on a door she could never again open. She worked now in a corset factory on West 34th Street, a place where steam hissed from broken pipes and fabric was dyed in vats so strong the scent clung to skin for days. She worked without speaking, without lifting her gaze. Her hands were blistered, her nails cracked, her spirit caged in silence. Each morning she woke before the sun. Each night she fell asleep, with Nicholas's letter hidden beneath her mattress. She had not thrown it away, she had not read it again, but she had also not let it go. Her lips no longer spoke his name, but her heart did, quietly, always. Meanwhile, Nicholas, tired, cold and aching, entered the small office of Thomas Blythe, a journalist and once friend from his university days. The office smelled of old ink and fresh coffee, the windows fogged from within. Thomas looked up, startled. "Nicholas," he asked, rising from his desk, "are you out of your mind? Do you know the city is devouring itself trying to find you?" "I'm not here to be found," Nicholas answered. "I'm here to find her." Thomas's expression softened. "Her," he said. "So, the rumors are true." Nicholas leaned on the edge of the desk, his fingers tense. "She left, vanished. I believe she changed her name." "And you think I can find her when you couldn't? You know the working districts better than I ever did. I need your contacts. Just help me." Thomas sighed. There had been a time when they stood on the same ground, before money drew lines between them. Perhaps this was Nicholas's way of returning to Earth. "I'll do what I can," he said quietly, "but I hope you know. Once she sees you, she may not want to be found." Nicholas said nothing. That afternoon, grey smoke rose from the factory rooftops on 34th Street. Inside the corset workshop, the air was thick with heat and dye. Anna, Margaret, moved through her tasks like clockwork. The rhythm was all that kept her sane. But then it happened. A scream, a spark, a hiss of flame that leapt too fast, too high. A boiling vat overturned. Panic, shouting, fire. The building erupted into chaos. Women ran, dresses catching embers, their hands flailing through smoke. The foreman shouted orders no one could hear. Flames licked the wooden beams overhead. Smoke filled the hallways like a rising tide. Anna tried to run, but her station was near the back. When she reached the corridor, the exit was blocked with fire. She coughed, her throat burning, her eyes stinging. The world tilted. She reached for the wall, but it burned her palm. Then came the collapse. A wooden beam cracked, splintering with a sickening groan. Anna dropped to her knees, shielding her head. But then, a voice. "Anna!" It cut through the smoke like light through fog. She turned. There, emerging from the haze, was Nicholas. His coat was singed, his face blackened with ash. But his eyes, those impossible eyes, were fixed on her with raw, unbearable urgency. She gasped, "No!" He reached for her. "Come with me!" "No!" she shouted, crawling backward. "You shouldn't be here!" He grasped her arm. "I'm not leaving without you." She stared at him, dirtied, breathless, utterly out of place in this inferno, and her heart tore open. But she pulled away. "You don't belong here!" she cried. "This world isn't yours." He was coughing now, the smoke thickening. "Then I'll burn with you," he said. She slapped him, softly, desperately, her voice breaking. "You belong to another world, Nicholas, one where I was never meant to exist." The words rang like a final bell, and he knew. He knew what she was saying. That love, no matter how sacred, could not survive in a world that punished those who crossed its lines. And still, he reached for her. "Let me take you out of here." But she shook her head. "No, not like this. Not with pity." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Just once." Then, with the help of a broken plank and the strength of desperation, he pulled her through the smoke, shielding her body with his. They stumbled down a back corridor, the flames snapping at their heels, until they burst into the alley behind the building and collapsed onto the snow-soaked cobblestones. Firefighters swarmed behind them. The factory moaned in its death throes. Anna lay gasping, her head in his lap, tears streaking her soot-covered cheeks. Nicholas brushed a lock of hair from her face. "Please," he whispered, "don't make me let go." She looked at him, her expression unreadable, and then she stood. Without a word, without a kiss, without a single backward glance, she walked away into the crowd of women gathering in the street. Nicholas remained there, alone, the snow melting beneath him. He had found her, and lost her again. The cold returned with a vengeance in the final days of February, slicing through the city like a judgment too long withheld. Fifth Avenue glistened beneath a layer of brittle frost, its carriages moving silently past mansions trimmed with ivy and disdain. But inside the grand hall of the Van Allen estate, the cold had nothing to do with the weather. Nicholas stood before the assembled guests, every inch of him pressed into the image of composure, tailcoat immaculate, waistcoat white as virtue, gloves tight against fists trembling with conviction. His mother sat near the fireplace, her face carved in marble. At her side, several distant cousins whispered behind lace fans, their curiosity sharpened by the promise of scandal. His father remained standing. The moment had come. "I will not marry Clara Willoughby," Nicholas said evenly, his voice carrying across the room with the quiet force of a man who had made peace with destruction. Nor will I pursue any union for the sake of title or reputation." The silence that followed was vast. Then came the voice of his father, measured, icy. "You will regret this." Nicholas met his gaze. "Perhaps, but it will be my regret." He turned without waiting for permission and walked out, the polished soles of his shoes echoing across marble. With each step, the weight of inherited expectation fell away until only the man remained. That afternoon, the Van Allen name was erased from all pending contracts and wills. Nicholas was disinherited, his accounts frozen, his future obliterated by the very legacy meant to sustain him. The social columns had their feast. Van Allenair rejects dynasty, family cuts ties in shame, love, or madness. New York's most eligible becomes nobody. But Nicholas did not read them. He took a room in a modest tenement near the East River, where the walls were thin and the stove fickle. He sold his pocket watch, then his cufflinks. He wore shirts without starch and walked the streets with hands in coat pockets, no longer recognized, no longer praised, and still he did not look back. Because he had made his choice. A name, once his birthright, had cost too many people too much. He would pay the price gladly. Meanwhile, Anna lay on a cot beneath a thin blanket, her body hollowed by fever and exhaustion. The fire at the factory had stripped more than her breath. The weeks that followed had drained her strength, and in the dark dormitory of a women's shelter she had collapsed. The other girls thought she might not wake, but she did. 3 days later, she opened her eyes to the sound of soft footsteps and the scent of soap and fresh linens. Her vision blurred, then cleared. She was no longer in the dormitory. The walls were pale blue, the curtains lace-trimmed, the window frosted with snowlight. The bed beneath her was soft. Her hands rested upon white sheets with delicate stitching. A nurse entered quietly. "You're awake," she said gently, taking Anna's pulse. "Where am I?" Anna whispered. "St. Cecilia's private ward. You've had a fever." "Pneumonia." Anna blinked slowly. "How?" "You were brought in anonymously. Someone left this." The nurse handed her a folded note. No signature, just a line written in firm, familiar script. "Even if you won't let me save your heart, I will save your life." Anna's lips parted, but no sound came. She turned her face toward the window. Outside, the snow fell in slow spirals, soft, relentless. That evening, when the nurse returned, another figure followed. Quiet, slender, coat dusted in snow. He removed his hat respectfully and stepped into the lamplight. Thomas Blythe. Anna remembered his face from the fire, blurred by smoke. The man who had helped Nicholas, the journalist, the friend. He sat at the edge of her bed, his voice low. "You don't know me," he began, "but I've come on behalf of someone who can't be here." She stared at him, her eyes shadowed with doubt. "Why?" "Because you told him to stay away." She turned her face. "Then he should obey." Thomas tilted his head. "You think he hasn't suffered?" "I don't—" Her voice cracked. "I don't know anything anymore." Thomas took a folded clipping from his coat. He laid it gently on the blanket. It was from the Herald. She read the headline, and then again. "Van Allen heir cast out after refusing society marriage." The words sank like stones in her chest. Thomas spoke softly. He gave up everything. The inheritance, the legacy, the name, all of it. "For you." Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. "He searched for you for weeks. Burned half his bridges doing it. I told him not to. I told him you might not want him, but he never once stopped." Tears gathered in her eyes, but did not fall. "He didn't know where you'd gone. Not until the fire." She stared at her blistered hands, resting on her lap like remnants of another life. "I told him we didn't belong to the same world." Thomas leaned forward. "Maybe not, but that didn't stop him from leaving his." Anna looked up slowly. Her eyes shimmered, filled with disbelief, and something more dangerous, hope. "He's not the man they wrote about in the papers," Thomas said. "Not anymore. You made him something better." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in many weeks, She allowed herself to remember the park, the snow, the kiss beneath the gaslight, the man who held her like a vow. She pressed a hand to her chest, where the fever had once burned, and felt the echo of his sacrifice beating softly beneath her ribs. He had paid the price of a name, and she had been the reason. The city wore its winter coat once more, but this time the snow felt different. It did not fall with the quiet innocence of December, nor with the cruel indifference of January. Now, in the earliest days of March, it came like a final test, thick and wet, clinging to every stone and shutter, as though the heavens themselves were reluctant to let go of the season. Anna stood before the black iron gates of the Van Allen estate, her gloved hands gripping the cold metal as wind pressed her cloak against her figure. Her heart beat fast, each pulse a whisper of something she was no longer certain she had the right to feel: hope. She had taken the long walk from the convalescent home on foot, refusing the kind offers of transport. She wanted to feel every step, every ache in her bones. She wanted to earn this moment. A servant approached the gate from inside, a tall man in a formal coat with eyes that did not soften. "I've come to see Nicholas," she said, voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. "Please tell him Anna Brooks is here." The servant hesitated, but only for a moment. Then the door of the mansion opened, and a tall woman stepped out into the cold. She was dressed in a thick cloak of navy wool trimmed with black fur, her posture sharp as a blade. Mrs. Margaret Van Allen. Anna's breath hitched. The woman descended the steps without haste, her chin high, her expression unreadable. She came to the gate, stopping just behind the servant, and studied Anna as one might a servant who had spoken out of turn, or a stain that would not come out of a fine carpet. "Miss Brooks," she said slowly, her voice precise. "Or is it Burke now? I confess it's difficult to keep track when women of your sort are always slipping between identities." Anna swallowed but did not look away. "I'm here to speak to Nicholas, nothing more. I'm afraid that won't be possible. I need only 5 minutes." "You've had enough minutes," Mrs. Van Allen replied, "more than most ever receive. Whatever kindness my son extended to you, whatever adolescent fantasy he entertained, is over. He has his own life to rebuild, without distractions." Anna's voice shook. "He gave up everything. And you think that makes him a martyr?" Mrs. Van Allen narrowed her eyes. "He gave up everything for a mistake, one he will regret until his last breath, but I will not allow you to twist the knife further." The gates remained closed. Anna took one step back, the humiliation flooding her cheeks in hot waves despite the bitter wind. Her dignity screamed at her to turn away, but her heart, the foolish, stubborn heart that had endured so much, refused. "Tell him I came," she said softly. "That's all I ask." She turned then, walking away from the mansion, her boots crunching through slush, her spine straight despite the tears burning behind her eyes. What she did not see, what Mrs. Van Allen failed to notice, was the figure standing in the shadows near the corner of the house. Hidden by the ivy-draped wall, Nicholas had seen everything. He had returned only moments before, a stack of translated pamphlets in his satchel and ink smudges on his fingers. He had come to speak to his grandmother, to settle a final account, but then he saw Anna at the gate, snow clinging to the hem of her cloak, her face pale and brave, and he heard his mother's voice. He had always known she would try to erase Anna, but seeing it, hearing the venom that dripped from every word, lit a fire in him he thought had long gone cold. He did not call out. Not then. He waited, watched her walk away, then followed. It took him nearly half an hour to catch up to her. She walked quickly, head bowed, not from shame, but from exhaustion. He found her near Washington Square, beneath the arch where once she had spoken of her childhood, her dreams of something better. He stepped into her path. She stopped. Their eyes met. Neither moved. The snow swirled around them like confetti at a wedding that would never come. "I heard," she said softly. "I saw," he replied. She looked down. She was right. "I don't belong in that world." He stepped closer. "Neither do I." Her eyes lifted to his. He looked different, rougher, the elegant lines of privilege softened by wear. His coat was patched at the elbow, his boots had seen better years, but his gaze had never been clearer. "I tried to stay away," she whispered. "I thought it was what you needed." "What I needed," he said slowly, "was to stop pretending that love had a place. It doesn't. Not in ballrooms, not in legacies. But here," he took her hand, placed it over his chest. "Here, it still lives. If you'll have it." Anna closed her eyes. She felt the warmth of him beneath her palm, the steady beat that once lulled her to sleep in dreams she had not dared to name. "I'm not a rich man," he said. "Not anymore. I never asked for riches. I have no name worth speaking, no promise of titles or ease." She shook her head. "I never wanted ease. I have only this," he said, pressing her hand closer. "My heart, my hope, and a desire to build something with you that neither of us has ever known. Not safety, not comfort, but truth." Tears spilled down her cheeks then, not from pain, but from the relief of being seen, wholly and without conditions. She nodded. Once. And it was enough. They stood in silence, the snow weaving around them like lace, the city breathing quietly at their feet. He pulled her into his arms, not as a lover claims, but as a man chooses, and she let herself be held. For the first time in their long, turbulent story, there were no more secrets, only two souls, scarred but standing, willing to fight not for a fantasy, but for something real, something imperfect, something worth everything. The morning of their wedding dawned with a hush that blanketed the city in reverence. No carriages lined the street, no musicians tuned their instruments, no silver trays gleamed in candle-lit halls, and yet it was the most sacred day of their lives. The chapel overlooking the Hudson stood quiet and unadorned, its stone walls weathered by wind and time. Inside, the pews were nearly empty. Only Thomas Blythe, seated near the back with his worn hat in his hands, and Sister Miriam, who had helped nurse Anna back to health, bore witness to the union. There were no flowers except the small bouquet of winter violets Anna carried, tied with a scrap of blue ribbon she had kept hidden in the hem of her apron for years. She wore a simple dress of pale grey wool, its neckline modest, her dark hair swept back in a chignon without ornament. There was no veil. Only her eyes, wide with tenderness and fear, carried the weight of the moment. Nicholas stood at the altar, in a suit borrowed from a friend of Thomas's, dark and slightly threadbare but clean. His gloves were too tight, and his shoes had seen better years, but never had he looked more like himself. When the officiant asked if they would take each other as husband and wife, their voices did not tremble, they did not whisper. They answered with quiet certainty, as two people who had been shattered and rebuilt by the same fire. Afterward, no rice was thrown, no photographs taken. They stepped out into the cold, hand in hand, the wind from the river tugging gently at their coats. And when Nicholas looked down at her, this woman who had once cleaned his floors, who now held his heart with the reverence of a sacred relic, he leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "We've done it," he murmured. "No," Anna whispered. "We've only just begun." They rented a modest two-room apartment above a print shop on Cherry Street, where the floor creaked in protest with every step, and the windows let in too much wind. Their furniture was borrowed or second-hand, mismatched chairs, a chipped tea set, a dented stove, but each item had been chosen with care, with them in mind. Anna lined the shelves with linens she had stitched herself. Nicholas repaired the draughty window panes with oilcloth and patience. At night, they read by lamplight, their voices soft as the wind outside. Nicholas began his work in a converted warehouse by the docks, advising immigrant families on how to navigate the Byzantine world of shipping contracts, cargo rates, and exploitative brokers. It wasn't lucrative, but it was honest. His surname was never mentioned. He signed documents simply as Nicholas, and that was enough. Anna's dream took longer to grow. With a small fund collected from women at the convalescent home, she rented a narrow storefront off Delancey Street. There, she opened a reading room for working girls, a quiet space with second-hand books, a pot of tea always warm, and no questions asked. The shelves were filled with novels, poems, educational pamphlets, and by Nicholas's quiet donation, a full set of Whitman and Dickinson, girls came in the evenings, after shifts in garment factories and laundries. They came shyly at first, then steadily, some just for warmth, others for silence, a few to learn how to write their names. Anna never lectured. She only listened, and in listening, she gave these women what no man or law ever had, a place to breathe. Their life was not easy, but it was theirs. They argued over how much coal to burn in winter, over whether sugar was a luxury or a necessity, and over Nicholas's tendency to stay too late at the docks. But those disagreements were brief, and their reconciliation always came with a shared blanket, a whispered apology, or hands intertwined beneath the table at supper. They still walked through the city sometimes, side by side, unnoticed and content in their anonymity. Occasionally, someone would glance too long in Nicholas's direction, squinting as though trying to remember a face seen in the society column years ago. But no one ever spoke. Their past, once gilded and painful, had receded like the tide, until the letter arrived. It came in the late afternoon, on a Thursday, tucked beneath the doorframe alongside a utility bill and a flyer for a vaudeville performance. The envelope was thick, the paper heavy. The handwriting was familiar, though older, less rigid than the letters Nicholas had once received in his youth. The seal, though faint, was unmistakably Van Allen. He stood at the table, holding it for a long moment before opening it. Anna, seated across from him, paused in her stitching. "Who is it from?" He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "My grandmother." She said nothing more, only watched as he unfolded the letter and began to read. The words were simple. "I have heard what you've done, not through the family, but through those who still dare to feel. I know you have given up the name we handed you with pride and burden. I do not write to shame you. I write to say this: I was wrong to believe love had to wear gloves and pearls. If you find yourself near the old estate again, know that the back garden is still yours and hers." There was no signature, only the initial M. Nicholas sat down slowly, the paper trembling in his hand. Anna placed her stitching aside and came to his side, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Does it change anything?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but it eases something." She leaned down and kissed his temple. "I'm glad," she said. That night, he placed the letter in a small wooden box beneath their bed, beside the deed to the reading room, the receipt for their wedding rings, and the note he had once left her on her hospital bed. A life, he had learned, was not built with grand declarations. It was built in quiet choices, made again and again, with faith in what could be, despite everything. And Anna, his Anna, had chosen him, not for his name, but for the man he had become without it. The sun had long since dipped behind the rooftops of Manhattan, but the city below still shimmered, pulsing with golden light and the hush of distant motion. The Hudson, silver and endless, curled like a ribbon beyond the buildings, reflecting 1,000 gas lamps and the flickering dreams of those who had yet to sleep. On the rooftop of a modest 3-story brick home nestled between a synagogue and a printing press on Delancey Street, Anna stood alone. Her coat drawn tightly over her shoulders, her dark hair swept into a loose braid that now bore threads of silver. In her arms, wrapped in a knitted blanket the color of ash and rose, slept a little girl no more than 3 years old, her lashes casting shadows against soft, rounded cheeks. The child's name was Clara, and she had her father's eyes. Anna gazed over the city, her breath rising in quiet clouds, her heart full in a way that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with earned joy. She had once feared this world, Once believed there was no place for her in it beyond servitude and silence. And now here she stood, on a rooftop she called her own, holding the child she had once thought impossible, surrounded by a life that had taken root not in riches, but in resilience. The wind curled gently around her, tugging at the hem of her wool skirt, and for a moment she closed her eyes. She felt the warmth of the child pressed to her chest, the hum of the city in her bones, the echo of every decision, every wound that had led her here. Then she heard the familiar creak of the rooftop door behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Nicholas's footsteps had not changed over the years, steady, measured, worn into the rhythm of her life like a beloved melody. He stepped beside her, wordless, and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, careful not to disturb the child. His coat smelled faintly of ink and wool, and of the tobacco he only smoked when the day had been especially long. She leaned back against him, her head resting just below his chin. Neither spoke for a long while. Then, softly, Nicholas whispered, "She fought sleep again, didn't she?" Anna smiled, a slow curve of memory and affection. She demanded a story, then 2 songs, then asked if snow had feelings. Nicholas chuckled. "A philosopher already. She'll break hearts, Nicholas." He tightened his embrace. "Only if she's anything like her mother." Anna turned her head slightly, her eyes finding his in the blue-lit shadow. "You still say things like that?" He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because I still mean them." Below them, the voices of the city softened. A streetcar bell echoed in the distance. Somewhere, a baby cried. Laughter rose from an alley 2 blocks over, followed by the muted clang of a door shutting. And up above, wrapped in stars and solitude, they stood as they had so many nights before. Still, together. Nicholas's hands rested on hers, both cradling the child. "She has your strength, you know," he murmured. "Even when she's angry, it's never just noise. It's purpose." Anna laughed, but quietly. "And her curiosity is all yours. She takes apart the sewing box just to ask how needles are made. She'll ask harder questions soon." Anna nodded slowly. "We'll answer them, even the ones that hurt." From inside the apartment, the clock on the mantel chimed 9. Nicholas sighed. "I should finish the report for the Harbour Commission." Anna tilted her head. "You promised you'd take tonight off." He smiled ruefully. "And I'm keeping that promise. Just a few lines more. Then I'm yours." She looked up, teasing. "You're already mine." He kissed her again, this time a little longer, a little deeper, and then slipped back through the door, leaving her in the silence of the stars. Anna remained still, her daughter sleeping soundly against her heart. She watched the city with eyes that had once stared at factory walls and boarding-house corridors, at soot-streaked glass and cruel smiles behind lace. Now, those same eyes saw a future unfolding, not grand, not golden, but real. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned her head. Thomas Blythe stood just inside the rooftop door, holding a paper-wrapped envelope. His hair had greyed at the temples, and his overcoat bore the signs of many winters. But his eyes were sharp as ever. "Forgive me," he said. "Nicholas said you might still be up here." Anna stepped forward. "Of course, Thomas. What is it?" He handed her the envelope. "A letter. It came to the Gazette, but it was addressed to you. Someone must have known I'd pass it along." She took it carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, slanted, elegant. Thomas lingered. "It's from the Women's Labour Forum." Anna raised her eyebrows. "The one on 10th Street?" He nodded. "They're inviting you to speak at the Spring Assembly." She stared at the letter, stunned. "Me? You?" Thomas said with a smile. "They've heard about the reading room, about the girls you've helped, about Clara even. You're being noticed, Anna." She lowered her gaze, her fingers gently cradling the envelope. "I never sought to be noticed." "I know," he replied. "That's why you're exactly who they need to hear." He left her then, his steps fading quietly down the stairs. Anna stood alone again, save for the heartbeat pressed against hers. She broke the seal. The letter was brief, gracious, firm. They requested her voice, her story, her truth. She looked out over the city once more, and for a moment she saw herself at 15, arriving in New York with nothing but threadbare gloves and a heart too open for its own good. She saw the girl who scrubbed floors, the woman who burned beneath the weight of silence, the maid who had kissed a man she thought she could never keep, and now she saw herself as she truly was, Anna Van Allen, wife, mother, reader, teacher, survivor. No ballrooms, no chandeliered parlors. Only this rooftop, this child, this letter, this love that had never asked for perfection, only for courage. She kissed Clara's brow and whispered into the night, "Thank you, not to the city, not even to fate, but to the past that had once tried to break her, because it had failed." And beneath the velvet sky of New York, two souls from opposite worlds had become one. New York, spring of 1906. The city had changed. The skyline now reached higher, its steel bones piercing the clouds with ambition. Streetcars gave way to motorcars, and the sound of hooves on cobblestones was slowly fading beneath the hum of machines. Electric lights danced along Broadway, and women marched in the streets, not just for work but for voice. Yet in the heart of the Lower East Side, beneath a canopy of blooming dogwoods and faded red bricks, time moved differently. On the corner of Suffolk and Rivington, in the same modest building where it all began, stood a small home whose walls had been patched and repainted, but never torn down. Its windows were always open in the spring, letting in the scent of lilacs from the alley below, and laughter, young, bright laughter, spilled out into the street like music. In the backyard garden, Anna knelt by a row of wildflowers, her apron streaked with dirt, her hair now threaded with grey that shimmered in the sunlight. At 34, she wore her years without apology. Her hands bore the stories of work and motherhood, and her eyes, wiser, softer, held a stillness born not of silence, but of peace. Beside her, two children played in the soil, shrieking at earthworms and stealing seeds when they thought no one was watching. Clara, now 11, had grown tall and willful, with a mind sharp as her tongue and a heart too large for the world she inherited. Her brother, Samuel, aged 5, was gentler, always trailing behind her like a shadow stitched in golden thread. Anna paused to watch them, brushing sweat from her brow. A smile lingered on her lips, quiet and full. Then came the sound she waited for every evening, the front door opening with its usual groan, followed by the rhythmic thud of boots and the scent of ink and coal. Nicholas stepped into the garden, his hair now touched with silver at the temples, his shoulders broader with the weight of time. He had left behind the title long ago, but never the grace. He kissed Anna's cheek as though it were the first time, then lifted Samuel into his arms and spun him once before setting him down, laughing. "Any letters today?" he asked softly, brushing dirt from Anna's sleeve. She nodded and reached into the pocket of her apron, pulling out a folded paper with a red seal. "They've invited me again, this time to Washington." Nicholas arched an eyebrow. "Another speech? Another petition," she said. "They want me to testify about literacy access for factory girls." He took the letter, scanned it, and then handed it back. "They'll listen," he said. "They always do." She looked at him then, truly looked. "And if they don't?" He smiled, leaning close. "You'll make them wish they had." The reading room had outgrown its narrow storefront years ago. Now it was a full center, supported by donations from women's unions and immigrant families alike. It was named not after Anna, but after Maria, the first girl who had ever learned to write her name within its walls, who now taught in a school in Queens. Anna didn't need recognition. She had her garden, her children, her work, and the man who had once set the world ablaze just to walk beside her in the light. As for Nicholas, his work with immigrants had grown into a network of advocacy offices scattered across the docks. He was no longer Nicholas Van Allen in name, but in presence he was more than the boy born into silver. He had become a man carved by fire, humility, and love. He had paid a price. He had buried both parents without reconciliation. His name was never restored to the wills nor the papers, but he had no regrets, because in their absence he had built something no inheritance could buy: a life, a legacy. In the spring of 1906, Mrs. Keene passed away, her boarding house sold and converted into government housing. Her name was not remembered. Her warnings faded into dust. Thomas Blythe, now editor of his own newspaper, still visited every Sunday with a bottle of port and stories of corruption and progress. He had never married, but he said the city was his wife, and he meant it. Jude Malley had left the city for the West, bitter and forgotten. He had spent years trying to mold the world into his image, only to be reshaped by its indifference. And Anna? She wrote by lamplight when the children slept, speeches, letters, quiet revolutions. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Nicholas brought her a new notebook bound in leather. On the first page, he had written, "To the girl who once walked invisible through Broome Street and became the woman who made the world listen." That night, as the children slept and the lamps flickered low, Anna stepped onto the rooftop of their home once more, the same rooftop where years earlier she had held her daughter and watched the city breathe. The sky was velvet again, the stars steady. Nicholas joined her as he always had, his coat draped over her shoulders. They stood in silence. And then she said, "Do you think we ever truly escaped the world we were born into?" He looked out over the rooftops, the lights, the vast humming promise of the city. "No," he answered, "but we remade it, in our image, one quiet choice at a time." She nodded, tears rising without sorrow, because she knew it was true. And under the velvet sky of New York, where the past once loomed like iron gates, two hearts, bound not by name or wealth, but by devotion and defiance, had created something greater than gold. They had created a life worth remembering. There are stories that whisper softly through time, not of riches gained or titles claimed, but of hearts that dared to choose love over legacy. Anna and Nicholas were never meant to meet in a world that measured worth by birth and bank accounts. Yet they did more than fall in love. They defied the rules, the whispers, the walls that society built around them. Together, they proved that what truly endures isn't gold or grandeur, but compassion, courage, and the quiet, everyday devotion between two souls who never gave up on each other. Their story reminds us that true happiness is not found in gilded mansions or perfect circumstances, but in the life we build, one small, brave choice at a time. If this tale moved you, if it made you reflect, cry, or believe again in the power of enduring love, I invite you to share it with someone who still believes in romance, or who needs to. Write the word velvet in the comments, so I know you made it to the end. You're part of a growing community that treasures stories with heart, history, and hope. And don't stop here. In the cards above, I've left more stories like this one. Each one is filled with unforgettable emotions, powerful women, and timeless love. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the most extraordinary stories are born from the quietest hearts.